Welcome to the Dice Tower, a series of video reviews about board and card games. Here are your hosts, Tom Vasel and Sam Healey.
Miami Dice. I'm Tom Vasel.
And I'm Sam Healey.
Today we're taking a look at Bioshock Infinite, the board game.
The Siege of Columbia.
Now, we need to get something out of the way right away. First of all, Sam and I are big board game fans. We've played more board games than most people have. And we're big fans, especially of Plaid Hat Games, which made this, because we like them a lot.
Yep.
On the flip side, I've never played any Bioshock game. I haven't even seen a Bioshock video game. And because of that, when we first went through the rules of this game, I understood the rules, but I had no idea what the theme was.
Right.
And I've heard, and then we had when we were playing, I had a guy come over who knew about the game, and he explained a little bit of it to us, and then we're like, oh, so that's why. So when I explain the game, I'm explaining it from a purely game point of view. I don't necessarily, I can't say, that's just like in the game.
Right. And that's what I was going to say. We haven't played the video game before, so we don't know how closely this mirrors the video game.
We are judging it on game alone.
Yeah, this is just the board game, and we're judging it just on the board game's credentials only, nothing else.
We'll take a look and be right back. As you can see, there's really piles of pieces all over this game, lots of different things. And you're playing, two teams are going against each other. So you can play 2 players or 4 players. That's how this works. If there's 4 players, then you split the dark blue and light blue units up and the light red and dark red pieces against each other. Otherwise, you put them all together. And in fact, even there's different decks of cards that are mixed with the light and dark blue cards. Otherwise, if you're playing 2-player, you play just with all one color against another color. Now, these cards are very interesting. Each card here has 3 numbers on it. Now, these 3 numbers are used for different things. One of the top number there is used when you're fighting someone else in combat. She'll play that card to give you a bonus in combat. The middle number is used when there's voting occurring, and so that will give you votes. And then the 3rd number you can use to get money. There's also special abilities, although you'll notice in front of this special ability here, there is a locked icon. And the reason that locked icon is there is because as the game progresses, you will be able to unlock different abilities. Each player has a card here, and as the game progresses, when different things happen over the course of the game, like when you win a combat, or you can just pay $3, or whenever you become the first player, you have the ability to place a unlocked token on one of these, so whenever those specific cards come up in your hand, their abilities are unlocked. Or, instead of unlocking ability, you can put a +1 on any of these numbers here, so when that card shows up, for example, a handyman card shows up in my hand, it will always be +1 money to whatever it is. And then you can even upgrade those to a +2 later on. So there's lots of different ways to manipulate the cards that you have in your hand. Players will have 3 different types of units. These units are differentiated by their bases. I mean, they're different models too, but their bases are going to be squares or stars, and those bases matter because you'll be rolling different dice, especially in combat. You'll notice that there's a white die, which goes from 0 to 4. There's a blue die, which goes from 2 to 6, and then there's a red die, which goes from 3 to 8. So you'll be rolling those dice in combat depending on the different people that you use. The game has different phases involved in it. There's always going to be an event phase. And in this event phase, you will turn over an event card, and it will tell you what you're voting on. Sometimes the blue team votes for this, and the red team votes against it. Sometimes it just straight up votes. And that is when you will be playing cards from your hand. You have a 5-card hand that you will be using each turn. You'll play cards for votes, but you have to realize that when you play a card for votes, you can't play it for its action. You can't play it for its attack ability, and you can't play it for its money later on. So you have to decide which one of those is worth it to you. And then different things will happen based on these, and the game will different things will take place. And then there are two kind of neutral characters who are moving around the board. These are two units, Booker and Elizabeth. Elizabeth will move around the board, and you can actually capture her sometimes and use her to your advantage. She will give you bonuses sometimes when you capture her. Booker is like this really powerful, annoying guy who runs around and shoots you. And so the card will tell you where he goes. The card also might have a picture of Elizabeth, and if that's true, you will look at the current timeline. There's a timeline. There's actually 3 different timelines, and you pick one of them to use over a course of the game. And every time the Elizabeth icon shows up, let me see if I can find an event card that shows that her picture on it. Here's one. When that picture, we move it down, and then some event will happen. Sometimes the card will show a picture of Booker. When that happens, wherever he is on the board, and each card will move him to a different zone on the board, he will fight the people in that zone, and he's a really annoying twerp. After the event phase, then each player takes a turn, and on the first thing on a player's turn, they can discard any number of cards in their hand for the money on it, and then they can buy and build not only units, but they can build structures. They can build turrets, which can be used in combat in a region and in the regions around it, or strongholds where they can build new units, or alarms that will give extra dice when you're attacked in those areas and add one to all the other dice that you have. Then you can move up to 4 units on your turn. When you move a unit, you can move it from one adjacent spot to another adjacent spot, and there's arrows on the board to show you which spots are adjacent. Or you can move a unit along rails. When you move units along these rail systems, then you have to roll a die. There's skyline systems. You roll 3 dice. These are special skyline dice. When you roll them, you roll, for example here, I rolled a 1 and 2 thumbs up. As long as you roll thumb up, you're fine. So you can go from one skyline spot to another skyline spot, and you can keep moving if you want with that same unit, but you just have to roll the dice again. If you ever do not roll a thumbs up, let's say I roll 001 here, then you must discard 1 card from your hand, or else the guy moving on the line is dead. And so it's possible for you to roll 3 ones and have to discard 3 cards or the person dies. So there's always a risk traveling along the skylines, but you can move your units there quicker. If you move your units into a spot where somebody else is, there's combat. You'll take turns playing combat cards, which will give you numbers and possibly special combat effects if you've unlocked them. You will roll dice, and the higher total will win. The loser loses 1 unit, and then has to send all the rest of the units back to one of their strongholds, and the game will continue. If you move into a neutral territory the very first time, you will turn it over to see what its automatic defense ability is, and if you beat it, then you'll get that much money. So at the beginning of the game, there's some money influx in the game, but as the game progresses, you will run out of those. Now, when you capture an entire region, the board is split up into different territories, territory A, B, C, D, E, and F. When you capture all those and you control it, you'll put a victory point down, and in that area, basically on top of that territory, to show that you control that, because the game is all about victory points. The first team to 10 victory points is the winner. But also at the end of each turn, you will turn over one of these victory point cards, and if anyone has this happen to them, these victory point cards, they will get points. For example, this one says, your faction controls 6 locations on the board. If you ever do that, you will get 1 victory point. Or you can destroy an enemy leader for 2 victory points. Or a stronghold for 1. Or your faction controls territory A and B and has built at least 1 stronghold. And so you can see there's many different sorts of these cards here, as long as they're in focus, of course. Your faction controls at least 1 unit in every territory. That's worth 4 points. And so these cards will show up, and maybe they have you control Elizabeth or whatever they are. And so players are getting those for points. And now it is possible that the game will end because Elizabeth escapes. Her token moves all the way down here. When that happens, whoever has the most points will win, although the game considers that a lesser victory. That you should have got 10 victory points before that. Other features of the game, it's possible for entire territories to be destroyed and nobody to be in those. At the beginning of the game, each player is going to get a leader, which will give you a special ability that you have over the course of the game. If you play with 4 players, they have a turn order card. So light blue, then red, then dark blue, then dark red. Whichever person goes first, they go, and then its turn orders takes back and forth, but they're definite teams. And there's a few other things as the game goes by, but that basically gives you a general idea of how the game works. All right, well, as I went through the rules of this game, I mentioned that it was a 2-player game or a 4-player game, but there are other games like this. I would say it reminds me almost of War of the Ring, where War of the Ring is a 2-player or a 4-player game, but essentially it's a 2-player game.
It's definitely a 2-player. This is way too long, and it drags out way too much as a 4-player game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think it was, I'll never play it with 4, but having played it with 2, it does go faster.
Right.
So let's talk about things that we like first. The component quality,
off the chart.
Yeah, fantastic.
Very good.
My favorite thing about the game is the cards. I love how you can use the cards for currency in 3 different things, and that unlocking card thing I've never seen in a board game before. It's a neat idea, being able to add. Now, Sam thinks that you should unlock things quickly. I think so too, but I think getting money out might be a good idea too.
That's one of the things we ran into in a 4-player game was as soon as the region tokens that you flip over, after you go in, you fight the guy, and then it gives you money. After those are gone, getting money becomes rather difficult. If you haven't used some of those card bonuses to boost up how much money you can turn in your cards for. So there's a balance there that you have to strike. Unlocking those special powers, I think, is a big deal, but you've got to prepare a little bit for the end game and start boosting up some of the money that the cards give you too.
Another thing I liked was the combat. I thought the combat system was pretty neat, where you could play cards to modify your combat, but then you still get to chuck dice.
Right.
And the dice are modified, and if you lose a combat, it's usually not the end of the world.
No.
I mean, it can set you back, but it's not like, oh, you just lost everything, you might as well quit. Usually your forces just have to retreat.
Yeah, and one of the things that I thought I saw, the board looks rather partitioned to where it's hard to get from one space to the other. But it's not really like that. Don't be fooled. The 4-player game that I was in, we had guys swooping in from across the board with special cards that were being played and that type of thing, and they were able to muster pretty good forces seemingly out of nowhere. So don't be fooled by the partition board and how far some places look away from some others.
Right, and there's a couple things I didn't mention when I went over the rules, but that big airship you saw and the guy with the wings, those can be used to move people a little bit faster.
Right.
But what's an interesting thing out of this game, and I'm curious what you think about this, is the transit system, the skylines or whatever they're called.
That's one of the make or break mechanics of the game, I think. It can either really, really help you. One of the guys that I played against, I don't think he ever lost anybody on the air rails. Whereas the rest of us were rolling horribly on the air rails. So both myself and my teammate, we were rolling horribly on the air rails. The opponent was rolling very, very well, and I think that was one of the major determining factors of the game.
So do you not like that then?
I don't know that I don't like it per se. I do think that it's heavy-handed. More plays, I think, will determine whether it's too heavy-handed.
Okay.
It is a randomizing factor, I think, because trying to think of another game that does this. When you're moving your attacking force in to another area and it's across the air rail, you're not guaranteed that your whole force is going to get there or not.
That's true. I mean, I guess it kind of says you can march your force more slowly.
Right.
Or you can move them faster and take the chance.
That's true.
It's an interesting mechanic, at least.
And the Air Raiders or something like that is a card you can play that you can transport a guy for free, not have to make that die roll for the air rails. But I don't know.
What did you think about Booker and Elizabeth running around and just causing havoc?
At first, they weren't causing very much havoc at all because it just seemed to work out that Booker was going to where nobody else was.
Yeah, but eventually you're everywhere, so he's going to come get you eventually.
And that's what I mean. At first, it wasn't really doing anything, but later on in the game, where you're a little bit more spread out, everybody else is a little bit more spread out, he does play a little bit more of a role. Elizabeth, not so much. She has a couple of things that affect the game in an abstract way almost, where you get more cards. One of the timelines.
And there's that timeline thing too.
One of the timelines she gives more cards to everybody to where it just kind of randomizes and everything a little bit more. So she was a little bit of a non-character, I think. Booker was a little bit more of a...
But Booker follows her, so I guess there's that kind of focal point.
Right.
Now, another thing I liked about the game is I like the victory point cards. I like having objectives. This is something we've seen in other games like Nexus Ops and Twilight Imperium, where there's objective cards to get points, and that kind of gives you focus. But at the same time, it gave you points for conquering different regions of the board.
Right.
So if you're someone who likes to conquer, you'll be satisfied.
Yes.
And if you're someone who wants to accomplish different objectives, which will be different every game, that's good. Couple that with the voting aspect. And I like that. How many cards are you going to use in voting? Well, that's great. You won the voting, but guess what? In combat, I'm going to kick you all over the place.
Yeah, that's very true.
So overall, I think...
One more thing.
Go ahead.
The board. I'm sorry. Let me say it. The board at the beginning of the games was very busy, very convoluted.
Yeah, it's pretty but busy.
But that went away, at least in my experience. That went away as the games bore on. You got used to following that air rail. You got used to everything. I don't know. It's kind of like when you're staring at a picture and it's fuzzy at first, but then after a while it becomes clear. That's kind of how I felt with the board. It was very hard and difficult to traverse in the first part of the game, but in the second half, didn't have a problem.
That's really interesting because I've heard people say about things like, oh, I liked it, but as time went by, it started annoying me. So you're saying the opposite here.
Yeah.
I think the production in this game is very high. I thought that the theme was interesting enough that I'm actually kind of half curious to see what the video game looks like now. It seems like a weird mix of steampunk / fantasy technological stuff, but it's a very solid game. So if you like the video game series, this will be an interesting thing for you to try. But if you like board games in general and you go, a licensed game, probably not good at all. No, it's very well designed. One of the players that was in the first game we played mentioned that it reminded him of Rex or Dune. And I don't know if I'd go that far, but there are some similarities because you have forces to control, special cards to control, you have that leader who can kind of give you a focus on what you're going to do. Yep. And the whole thing it really fits together well. You're never sitting apart going, oh, this is kind of boring. No, the game stays interesting the whole time.
Yeah. Well, during a 4-player game, I think there's a couple times where it can get boring.
Well, yeah, when three people go, right.
So, because you have a lot of downtime in between.
So you're recommending this only as a 2-player?
I really think we need to stay kind of like a purist here. It's a 2-player game that can be played as a 4-player game, but I think it really shines as a 2-player game.
All right, well, that's Bioshock Infinite, The Siege of Columbia.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.